Welcome to another episode of Carolyn Talks Television. I'm Carolyn Topol, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Rachel Arnett.
Hey,
She's laughing, but it's the truth, folks. She is fabulous.
Thanks.
Well, today we have two things planned for you. This is part 2 of our series about family viewing and what people were viewing as a whole, what we would have thought of as family viewing. Today we're going to be exploring the 1970s. So we're going to have a groovy time. Yes, I said it. I said it. And I was there, so I know. We are going to have a groovy time. But
I was not there, but I believe you.
Oh, this is one of those, trust me, I know it, I was there. And you'll see by the shows that Rachel will understand it too. But before that, we would be very remiss in not recognizing that the Emmy nominations before this taping date were just announced a few days ago. And there's just a few things we want to point out and share with you. And we'll see what happens in the Emmys, because we'll give a quick guess as to what's going to happen for ourselves and see where we show up in there. Drum roll. Just some of our highlights. I'm going to let Rachel start this time because I know she's got a couple she really wanted to talk about. So go for it, Rachel.
So Outstanding Drama Series, it's not a huge surprise. A lot of the shows that were nominated. Better Call Saul has been nominated repeatedly. Bodyguard at BBC has been doing phenomenally. Game of Thrones, Killing Eve, Ozark, Pose, Succession, This Is Us. So mostly shows we have heard of or have a lot of buzz.
And mostly shows that are not necessarily on networks.
Yep. This Is Us is, Pose is.
And Pose is what I would call, I apologize, FX, somewhat of a secondary network. However, coming up with outstanding programming lately.
When Pose hooks up with when FX hooks up with Ryan Murphy, it's just magic.
I agree. I think when Ryan Murphy hooks up with something,
with
it's
anything,
magic.
Pose, I've talked about it before. I want Pose to win everything. If I could create an award show just for Pose, it's like the top actor on Pose, like just the Pose shows, I would do it. But they'd all win because every performance is phenomenal. I think it's amazing that they got recognized for Outstanding Drama Series, because even though it is very comedic in a lot of ways, the time period that it's covering in the 80s and early 90s, in the midst of the AIDS crisis, they never let you forget that despite this incredibly live phenomenon of the ballroom scene, there's this undercurrent of fear and of pain, and they just intertwine the lives of these people in a way that you feel, perhaps to an extent, what they felt. Characters passing away.
And having been a young adult in that time period, it is a really emotional time. It is a really emotional time. I've known those people. I've lost a person or two, and it portrays it well.
Yeah. And I think what Ryan Murphy does, and he did The Normal Heart before, so he talked about ACT UP and the rise of activism. He wants people to remember that time period, because I do think that young people now, within and without of the LGBT community, don't really get that, because AZT has always existed. They've had sex education classes that talk about condom use and all of these things. So I think they're doing a really good job of not letting people forget what was a really painful and scary time.
The other thing it sends is a secondary message that voices matter. Volume of voices matter, and I don't mean loud.
And representation of those voices, making sure it's not just ACT UP, which was in many cases initially a very white organization. So involving persons of color and involving underrepresented groups and their voices. I think he just does a phenomenal job of letting people tell their own stories.
And I have to say, of course, Game of Thrones is no surprise for anybody. I think the quantity of awards that went to Game of Thrones was a lovely nod to their finale. I think a lot of it was being nice. I think when you have 4 nominations for any one category in terms of acting, I think you're giving them quite a lot of credit.
Yeah, so and you're talking about outstanding supporting actress in a drama.
Correct. And
4.
also the supporting actor as well.
Yeah, there were, what, 3 for?
3 in supporting actor. So when you start doing that, you're saying, number one of two things is happening. Either there's not enough good dramas out there.
Which we know is not the case. There's so many.
There's so many, especially with all the streaming channels.
Yeah.
If you have Amazon Prime, if you have Hulu, if you have Netflix, you could be watching new dramas, every hour of every day. We'd be up 24/7 if we watched every one of them. I'd love to. I can't. Send me things that you think are great. I'd be happy to check those out. If you want to send them to the West Hartford Community Interactive, we'd love to hear about what you want us to see. But I think Game of Thrones really almost was, I don't want to say over-nominated because I don't want to be that judge, but it sort of seems extreme.
Yeah. Well, there are some people that make a little more sense to me than others.
Okay.
As far as the nomination, I think there's some. It's also just very interesting because some of the people who are nominated. So, outstanding supporting actress, you have Lena Headey, Gwendolyn Christie, Sophie Turner, and Maisie Williams.
And one of the big deals was that one of these actresses,
Gwendolyn Christie,
chose to self-nominate. When she wasn't put forward for that nomination, she chose to self-nominate, did it herself, and guess what? She made the cut.
Which 100% fits her character, too, which I love. She was a female knight. She's knighted in the final season. Sorry, spoiler alert. But sorry at this point. It's been a while. Sorry.
It's been on. Binge watch it. You'll see that piece, but that's not the whole finale, believe me.
It just fits her character, and it makes me love her even more because she went for it.
Yes.
And she got it. She put herself forward and she got the nomination.
And then a couple of other pieces I don't want to forget in terms of Emmys. Mm-hmm. Let's go to comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go to comedy. All right. I had finally, as many of you know, gotten my Amazon Prime.
Yes.
I finally got Amazon Prime, and the first thing I did was I tried The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and ended up to be a 3-day binge. I watched both seasons. I mean, granted, it's not 26 episode seasons like they were, 25 years ago. But I watched both seasons in 3 days, maybe 3.5, because I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
It is one of the most brilliant comedies I have ever seen. Honest, real, and in my opinion, one of the things that gives it real cred in my mind is I mentioned it to my mother-in-law, who is from that time period exactly.
Yeah.
That's her era, is the era of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She watches it, and she said, oh, I love that show, but I'm so angry at them. They haven't given me season 3 yet. When are they going to do season 3? She doesn't even watch television. She sometimes forgets how to turn on the TV just because she doesn't watch TV. But this she watches.
Yeah.
So much so that she's waiting very anxiously for season 3. That sends me a good message. And they got a lot of Emmy nominations in all these categories.
Well, and they won so many last year. And it was, sometimes you see a show and you're like, okay, they're getting a lot of nominations. Maybe,
this year it'll be nice, and next year we'll be back to normal.
No, they still
They have more nominations, I believe, this year than they did their first season.
Well, and the other thing that I love in this comedy series, you have all the usual players. You have Barry, which was nominated last year. You have Veep, which was nominated in its final season.
Which is why I think Veep might be the winner, because it'll be a nod to Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I think they're going to give either her the present or Veep the present.
Yeah. But gosh, I wish it would be Schitt's Creek, which I know.
Which is hilarious.
And it'd be a Canadian show would win, which would be amazing.
And it's just enough naughty, as well as some of these others, to make you laugh at the naughty without saying, oh my God, it's like watching Blazing Saddles, which was like throw it in your face nasty.
Exactly.
Which I love, by the way.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Nothing against throw it in your face nasty. But
I wouldn't want a series.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want Blazing Saddles to be a series, and you wouldn't want that kind of humor to be going on and binge watch it. It would just get old really fast.
Exactly. And it's just interesting for me because Schitt's Creek also, Catherine O'Hara and Eugene Levy were nominated.
Which is amazing.
Eugene Levy, again, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything. Even American Pie back in the day, like he was charming. And that was not a charming movie. Like he just,
Yes.
because he seems so austere and is put in these ridiculous situations, it just works. And we're not really, like, we're laughing with him. And I never get the sense that I'm laughing at him for being, like, uptight. He just, because like, this is Eugene Levy. And he created the show with his son, Dan, who's also on the show. And I wish he was nominated because he is unbelievable. But.
And Eugene Levy, I've always seen as a character actor, but this character really owns him. I'm seeing him less as a character actor and more as a star.
Yeah.
More as a star, not the supporting actor, not the guy who's playing somebody else's buddy, friend, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm seeing him as a star.
Yeah. And for me, Catherine O'Hara, it's the same thing. You know, all the way, she's done so many movies that just, the character is just so utterly ridiculous, and yet you love them, and that's all her. She will do anything. She will dress as a crow and pretend to be in The Crowaning or whatever the movie is called. and at the same time, you're like, oh, like, you never forget that she's this brilliant actress because she just embodies these characters and all of their ridiculous quirks. The accent that she's derived for Moira on the show is just
fabulous.
Everything.
That actually reminds me of what the woman who played Edith Bunker, Gene Stapleton, did for that character. For years, people never understood when she spoke outside of the show that Edith Bunker's voice was created.
Yes, exactly.
It was not that woman.
Because it just, she physicalized it in a way that it seems natural.
I'm going to talk about one more category right now because we want to get to our series conversation. Outstanding limited series is quite
that is a
colorful, I would say, stacked category. Chernobyl, Escape at Dannemora, Fosse Verdon. I love Fosse Verdon.
I don't know if she liked Fosse Verdon. She never talked
Sharp Objects, and When They See Us. Each one of these had such a depth.
Yes.
In their own right, and they took, in more than one case, maybe almost, I think all these cases, real life, brought it to the dramatic level without losing the real part.
Yes, and without making it seem overblown. Kept you in the real human emotions. They may have taken liberties, but it never felt like a roll your eyes moment, like, yeah, okay, that didn't happen.
And I believe in almost, if not all of these series, most of them had people involved in the experience, participating in the development, creation, production, producing, some component of it to give it the legitimate story that it is. Like I said, Fosse Verdon I loved because I thought Gwen Verdon and Bob Fosse were both talents that were
singular,
one of a kind.
Yeah,
they will never be repeated, and there was nothing like them previously. Michelle Williams winning a nomination for Gwen Verdon. I could not believe that when I watched Fosse Verdon, I didn't see Michelle Williams, because I was a big fan after she had passed, of her films and things like that. I had seen tapings of her Broadway work. I couldn't imagine anybody could walk into that role and assume it. And not only did she assume it, she made me believe she was Gwen Verdon. That's talent.
Well, and it's funny because, I'm on social media a lot, and there's one scene where she's crying, and people have pointed that, like if she didn't get a nomination for this scene alone, and it's literally that she cries and she wipes a tear and then turns it into this, like, lovely move, and everyone was like, yep, that seems right.
That's
like
Gwen
for
Verdon.
that, like for that move alone, like all the awards.
So we shall see what happens now. Now we're going to move on, so we don't neglect the 70s. But one thing we didn't mention in the 60s, which was very unusual to happen, was My Three Sons was a huge family hit, and that was about a single father.
Which, back in the 60s.
And the guy who's helping him is not a maid, but is an uncle. and 3 guys growing up in the household until ultimately one of them marries, and then she joins the family and moves in the house. Lord knows how big this house became.
They always seem to have like unlimited space in the houses.
Right.
The Brady Bunch, Full House. They all have so much space.
They could, yeah, really. What they do is hysterical. But the fact that this was a single father show, I wanted to point out, because in the 60s, that was pretty darn unheard of in real life.
Yeah.
And to have demonstrated that it was a functional family. As much as functional was, they still were a series where they resolved it. It was a sitcom. They resolved the problem in the half hour, but it was a guy thing. And they resolved it in as guy a way as you did back then.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that. And now we move on to the 1970s, of which I have several personal favorites because I was there.
I have seen reruns.
And all of these have been in reruns because they were all outstanding.
Yeah.
In their own way.
Yeah.
Some
absolutely.
ridiculous, some not. From the ridiculous, like Three's Company. Wow. Talk about a leap. One guy living with 2 girls pretending he's gay. I don't know that they ever use the word gay.
No, they
alluded to
happy.
it though.
He's a happy fella.
But that when he was permitted to move in with them, it was alluded to that it would not be a problem with him living with 2 women. Which I always found amusing how they worked through that. Wow, that was huge. The Jeffersons,
which like cultural phenomenon, like created characters that resonate still today, has scenes that are replayed. I know they just did kind of a, not montage, like a reviewing of the Jeffersons, and
they also did. Jamie Foxx did a new
Foxx.
live.
Yes, that's what I was talking about.
Instead of doing a live show like you've been seeing live Broadway shows on TV, they did a live episode of All in the Family and a live episode of the Jeffersons with current actors. And oh my God, I watched those and I thought, first of all, I remembered the shows and I saw how much the issues, because they didn't change a word of the script. That was part of the deal.
It still resonates 100%, which is meaningful and sad. Like, I think
a little bit scary too, because it was about where people are placed in society, and where people are pocketed in society, cornered in society, and not others trying not to let them out. And the fights will still be let out. It's still going on. And now we're talking about the 70s. And to get even more political, let's talk about MASH.
Which, to this day, is probably one of my favorite television shows of all time.
It is my husband's favorite show. One of my top 5 for sure.
I, obviously, my connection to the Korean conflict is basically nil.
And the show MASH was written about the Korean conflict as an expose of Vietnam.
Yeah.
It wasn't about Korea.
Yep.
But it was about Vietnam.
And it just, from the second you hear the opening chords, which I didn't realize the song was called Suicide is Painless until many, many years later when I think I Shazammed it and I was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. Like it just, the opening chords are mournful and Alan Alda is just...
You can name that tune in one note for sure.
Oh, yeah.
That first chord of the opening, everybody knows it. Everybody knows the scenes. And people watched this movie about a mobile army surgical hospital, which is pretty hard to watch.
Yeah.
As a family.
Yep.
People would literally sit down and watch this. It was not at 8. I believe it was a 9 o'clock show on purpose because they didn't want little children seeing it. Because they did talk about, somehow including humor, the blood, the sadness.
It's the strangest thing when I look back at it because I started watching because my dad loved it. And I came in, obviously not at the first episode, I think I came in halfway through. And I remember thinking, why am I laughing? This is awful. But it's the dialogue and it's the characters and the reality is that amongst this war, there is life. Like, people are still people. They're going to make their hooch and they're going to kiss and tell, and all of these things are going to happen. But they never let you forget. You know, you'll be in the midst of one of the funniest scenes. You're cracking up, and then you hear the helicopter blades whir, and you see everybody immediately shift.
And you also, there was episodes that made it mimic live broadcasts of news going there, news reporters going to the war zones. I tell you, that show lasted, I think, 11 or 12 years. The cast evolved and revolved. Yep. And it worked. It worked.
I can't think of another show, to me, that really is on the same level as MASH.
And the fascinating thing, of course, is the Korean conflict was a couple of years.
Yeah.
And this is what they were able to do because it wasn't about Korea. It was about war, and at that time, Vietnam, and even post-Vietnam. On to the happy. We had some amazing things. The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Another one that will never be matched in my mind as a young woman who was watching this, a teenager.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen, I would say, fewer Mary Tyler Moore episodes than MASH.
Okay.
But the ones that I remember stand out to me. Like, I remember the funeral scene where they're all cracking up, and it just...
Yes, where she starts to laugh.
And it's a clown's funeral, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And the whole time
he played a peanut in his life.
He did.
He played a peanut, and people laughed and laughed because he was killed by an elephant in a parade.
And she's so serious, and the whole episode she's telling everyone, stop laughing, this is a person's life. And then at the funeral, somebody says something, and she just loses it. And it's totally unexpected because this whole episode she was going after people for being very serious.
Yes.
And the second her face cracked and she started laughing, I was literally on the floor crying so hard from laughing because it just...
I would challenge anybody to watch that episode who has never seen it and not laugh your head off at the end with her where tears are not coming down your face. Yeah. It was that good. And families, once again, and the nice thing is when families watch this, I was surprised because my dad didn't love it at first. Because this was about a very powerful woman in the workforce starting out really low. She was going to get lower pay, she discovered.
Yep, but she's going to make it after all.
But she's going to make it after all.
Everyone does the hat thing when they go to New York the first time, I think.
Which was funny because it was in Minneapolis,
I know.
But people think of it as New York City.
I 100% thought it was New York for the longest time.
Right, right.
Which made no sense because they had so many references to Minneapolis. I just blocked them out, I think.
Because people see New York City as the place people go to find their independence and find themselves.
Yep.
And I got to tell you, Mary Tyler Moore was hilarious. She had hilarious conversations. The co-stars, I would have said, were the star. It was all stars.
Yeah.
You had stars. It was all stars in that show. And even guests. Guests there were all stars and all loved Mary Tyler Moore herself. Yeah. So that made it even easier.
You get the sense of real love and camaraderie, which shows through, I think, in so many ways.
And they were one of the few shows that made the choice to go out while they were on top. That was sort of the beginning of that decision. Yeah. Most shows, including MASH, faded because the ratings did. Mary Tyler Moore said, we've told our story.
Yeah.
Let's give them a finale they will love. Yeah. And they did.
Which I'd say happens a lot more now.
Yes, it is.
Like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Jane the Virgin just did the same thing. A lot of shows now are saying, you know, we're doing really well. We've told our story. Let's not take this past the point where people are no longer loving these characters.
Right.
Like they're honoring the story and the characters.
I'm going to give you a couple more that honored stories went out low, but were able to come back with finales later that made sense. Or the finale of the show gave an uplift before the end, before the dying end. Happy Days.
Where the literal phrase jump the shark came from.
Yes.
But Henry Winkler, how can you not? He's just like the most charming, even as the Fonz.
They tried very hard to keep that show together.
Yeah.
And I think the last, at least 2 or 3 seasons, they were really, really scraping the bottom of the barrel. once Fonzie jumped the shark, I think
quite literally. By the way, we're not kidding. There's a literal scene where he jumps a shark. Hence the phrase "jump the shark."
And then they were very wise, and they did a final show where Joni and Chachi marry, and that's what everybody needed to see. And they wiped the slate clean, and we were all done. Spin-offs from Happy Days, however, also marked TV family viewing. Mork and Mindy. I don't know one person who was in a family
who did not
watch Mork and Mindy.
Robin Williams, like early Robin Williams.
And it was funny because he did ad-lib during the show.
Oh, yeah.
He did demonstrate his humor, yet at a family-appropriate level. I'm not sure how he did it because somehow he held himself back.
It's so insane to me when you see Robin Williams stand-up specials from that time, and then you see almost all of the characters he played at that time. And they're totally different.
And someone like me and my parents who watched Mork and Mindy were all saddened for different reasons when he so sadly left us. That was truly a star that went out too fast.
But oh man, on that show.
And fortunately gave us information in his passing and an education in many ways. Loved the show. Another spin-off from Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley. Oh my God, two women working single, living together because they can't afford to live on their own. I mean, they're working girls. Let's face it, fabulous. And then other shows of the period, Sanford and Son. Wow, another show focused on the not so well-off black family. He had the Jeffersons here, and yet Sanford and Son here, and yet both worked. And both worked not only for one type of socioeconomic family. We watched them both.
Absolutely. The characters were so rich that even though the shows weren't always full of depth and they could be lighthearted, the characters were so rich that they grabbed you immediately.
Charlie's Angels still alive now.
Okay, there's a new Charlie's Angels movie coming out with Kristen Stewart.
I mean, that's how impactful that series was. The $6 Million Man, so amusing. And I'm going to end with, think about this, The Brady Bunch still airs. The Brady Bunch is going to now be on the original actors, 6 kids, are on HGTV, coming soon. I believe it's in September. You didn't know this?
No. Ooh.
They bought the house that was the facade of the...
Oh, that's right.
They bought the house
right under Lance Bass's nose.
Lance Bass wanted that house. Instead, HGTV bought it, contracted the 6 actors and actresses who played the original 6 children, and have literally recreated the actual Brady Bunch home. And I know for me, I remember every Friday night living with the Brady Bunch, the Partridge Family, and I'm not sure the order, I apologize if I get it wrong, Nanny and the Professor, and at some point later at night, it was I think Saturday night maybe, or Friday, was Love American Style. It was all in the late 70s, and let me tell you, that was the viewing in the Love American Style. I still to this day love the theme. If I could sing, I'd sing it for you.
With Brady Bunch, the one thing I want to say quickly about Brady Bunch is that, for me anyway, it was the first show that I recognized that had a blended family. And I don't know if there were others before that. My knowledge is a little bit limited in that area, but it just...
Well, the one thing they never told about was that the mom of the guys, of the boys, passed away. They never talked about what happened to Carol, and she gets talked about later that, of course, it was supposed to be that it was a divorce, but they never spoke of it the entire series. Lends itself to being in the 70s. So while we've had our little nostalgia and Emmy viewing today, all in one big bag, we will continue our family viewing and move into the much more controversial 80s.
In every possible way.
And for Rachel and myself, thanks for watching Carolyn Talks Television, and we will see you next month.